She had been standing for hours, her hands trembling as she scrubbed the cold marble floor until her body finally gave up. Zawadi collapsed without warning, the small bottle of medicine slipping from her fingers and shattering beside her. No one rushed to help. No one called her name. They only stared or stepped around her like she was nothing. But then a man in a tailored suit stopped. A powerful CEO, slowly kneeling beside a broken maid. Why would someone like him care about someone like her? Before we continue, tell me, where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? And if stories like this touch your heart, don't forget to subscribe. Zawadi Ndlovu woke before the sun, as she always did, not because she was rested, but because sleep had long stopped being something her body trusted. In the cramped single-room shack she shared with her mother on the outskirts of Johannesburg, the air was heavy and still carrying the faint smell of damp walls and old medicine. The thin mattress beneath her creaked as she shifted, careful not to wake Mama Nima, who lay curled on the other side, her breathing uneven, fragile, like a flame struggling against the wind. For a moment, Zawadi just lay there, staring at the cracked ceiling above her. Her body ached in places she could no longer name. Her arms felt like they belonged to someone else, someone older, someone already worn down by life. But there was no time to think about pain. Pain did not feed them. Pain did not buy medicine. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes, then reached for the small tin box hidden beneath her pillow. Inside were a few folded notes and coins, everything she had managed to save over months of relentless work. She counted it again, even though she already knew the number. It was not enough. It had never been enough. Behind her, a soft cough broke the silence. "Mama," she whispered, turning quickly. Mama Nima stirred her thin frame, trembling slightly, as another cough escaped her lips. It sounded deeper than yesterday, heavier. Zawadi's chest tightened. "I'm here," Zawadi said gently, moving closer. She placed a hand on her mother's forehead. It was warm, too warm. "Did you sleep at all?" A little Mama Nima replied weakly, forcing a small smile that didn't reach her tired eyes. "You should have woken me. You need rest too, my child." Zawadi shook her head softly. "I'm fine." It was a lie they both understood, but never challenged. She helped her mother sit up, supporting her frail back as she reached for a cup of water. The medicine bottle beside them was almost empty, just a few drops clinging to the bottom. "We'll get more today," Zawadi said quickly, as if saying it with enough certainty could make it true. Mama Nima looked at her, something unspoken flickering in her gaze. She knew the cost. She knew the weight her daughter carried. But she also knew better than to argue. "You've already done enough," she murmured. Zawadi forced a smile. Not yet. Outside, the township was beginning to stir. Voices rose in the distance, children calling vendors, preparing their stalls, the distant rumble of taxis starting their routes. Life moved on, indifferent to anyone suffering. Zawadi changed into her worn uniform, a simple dress faded from too many washes, the fabric thinning at the seams. She tied her hair back neatly, even though no one ever seemed to notice the effort. Then she grabbed her small bag and turned back to her mother. "I'll come back before night," she said. "Try to rest." Mama Nima reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "Come back safe." Zawadi nodded, though safety had long stopped being something she could promise. The walk to her first job took nearly 40 minutes. Dust clung to her shoes. As she navigated the uneven roads, her mind already racing through the long day ahead. She worked mornings at a small roadside cafe, afternoons cleaning offices in the city, and evenings at a private estate where the pay was slightly better but the treatment was far worse. By the time she arrived at the cafe, the sun had fully risen, casting a harsh light over everything it touched. The owner, a middle-aged woman named Sadie, barely glanced at her as she entered. "You're late," Said said sharply. Zawadi checked the clock. She was not, but she lowered her gaze anyway. "I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't wash dishes," Said snapped, turning away. Zawadi moved quickly tying an apron around her waist and heading straight to the sink. The pile of dirty plates seemed endless, stacked high like a silent accusation. She rolled up her sleeves and began scrubbing her hands, moving automatically, even as her thoughts drifted back to the small room she had left behind. Was her mother resting? Had the fever gotten worse? She shook the thoughts away. Worry would not change anything. Only money could. Hours passed in a blur of clattering dishes, spilled drinks, and sharp commands. By midday, her back burned, and her feet throbbed, but there was no break. There was never a break. When her shift ended, she was handed a small amount of cash, barely enough to matter. She thanked Maid anyway. From there, she rushed to the city where tall glass buildings stood in stark contrast to the dusty roads of her home. Inside one of those buildings, she cleaned offices that belonged to people who would never know her name. She wiped desks, polished to perfection emptied bins filled with things people threw away without thinking, and vacuumed floors that had never known real struggle. Sometimes she paused for just a second, imagining what it would feel like to sit in one of those chairs, to belong in a world where survival was not a daily battle. But imagination was a luxury she could not afford. By the time evening approached, her body was already begging her to stop. But her day was far from over. The estate loomed ahead, its gates tall and imposing, guarded as if protecting something sacred. Inside, everything was immaculate green lawns, shining floors, walls that seemed to whisper wealth. Zawadi stepped in quietly, her presence barely acknowledged by the staff who outranked her. Late again, a voice called from across the hall. Zawadi looked up to see Tini Adebayo leaning against the staircase, her expression laced with irritation. "I came as fast as I could," Zawadi replied softly. Tini rolled her eyes. "Excuses? There's work to be done. Or did you think this is a charity?" Zawadi lowered her gaze. "No, ma'am." "Good. Then move." And she did. She cleaned, scrubbed, carried, and polished until her arms felt like they would give out. Every movement required effort she no longer had, but she forced herself forward anyway, because somewhere in a small dim room, her mother was waiting. Hours later, as the night deepened, Zawadi stepped outside for a brief moment, her chest rising and falling rapidly. The world around her spun slightly, her vision blurring at the edges. She reached into her bag and pulled out the small tin box again, opening it under the faint light. She counted the money once more. Still not enough. Her hands trembled as she closed it, a quiet desperation settling deep within her bones. Inside the house, laughter echoed, carefree, distant, untouched by the weight of survival. Zawadi stood there alone in the darkness, her body exhausted, her heart heavy. And for the first time in a long while, fear crept in, not of the work, not of the exhaustion, but of losing the only person she had left. Behind her, a door slammed, snapping her back to reality. Zawadi Tini's voice rang out. "If you're done resting, get back inside." Zawadi swallowed hard, wiping her face quickly before turning back. "Yes, ma'am?" And as she stepped back into the bright, unforgiving lights of the estate, something inside her quietly broke, but she kept going anyway. Because she had no other choice. Zawadi realizes no matter how hard she works, she still cannot afford her mother's life-saving treatment. By the time Zawadi left the Adebayo estate that night, the sky had already swallowed the last traces of light. The road back to the township felt longer than usual, her legs heavy, her steps slower with each passing minute. Every part of her body ached, but it was the quiet ache in her chest that weighed the most, the kind that no rest could heal. When she finally reached home, she paused at the door, steadying her breath before stepping inside. Mama Nima was awake. "You're late?" Her mother whispered, her voice thin but gentle. Zawadi forced a smile as she knelt beside her. Work was busy. Mama Nima studied her face, her tired eyes seeing more than Zawadi wanted to reveal. "You didn't eat again, did you?" Zawadi looked away. "I ate at the cafe." Another lie. Mama Nima didn't argue. She simply reached out, placing a weak hand against her daughter's cheek. You cannot carry the whole world alone, my child. Zawadi swallowed hard. I'm not alone. I have you. A silence settled between them, heavy, unspoken. Zawadi quickly changed the subject, pulling out the nearly empty medicine bottle. I'll get more tomorrow, she said, her voice firm, as if certainty could chase away reality. Mama Nima nodded faintly, though they both knew tomorrow would bring the same struggle. That night, Zawadi barely slept. Each time she closed her eyes, her mind replayed the same thought. Not enough. Never enough. Before dawn broke again, she was already on her feet. The routine repeated itself, cafe, offices, estate, but something shifted that day. The exhaustion was no longer something she could push aside. It clung to her, like a shadow, slowing her movements, blurring her focus. At the cafe, she dropped a plate. The sharp crash echoed through the small space, drawing immediate attention. Maid turned, her face tightening. What is wrong with you today? I'm sorry, Zawadi said quickly, bending down to pick up the shattered pieces. Sorry again, Maid scoffed. Do you think apologies replace broken plates? Zawadi kept her head down. It won't happen again. It better not, Saeed snapped. Or don't come back tomorrow. The words struck deeper than they should have, not because of the threat, but because she couldn't afford to lose even this. I understand, Zawadi murmured. She worked faster after that, forcing her trembling hands to steady her mind to focus. Mistakes were a luxury she could not afford. But the day only grew heavier. At the office building, her supervisor handed her an extra floor to clean. Someone called in sick, he said casually. You'll handle it. Zawadi hesitated. Sir, I already have. You want the job or not? He interrupted. Her words died instantly. I'll do it. By the time she finished, her arms felt numb. The vacuum dragged behind her like a weight she could barely carry, and each step felt like walking through water. Still, she moved forward, because stopping was not an option. When she arrived at the Adebayo estate that evening, her uniform was damp with sweat, her face pale beneath the dim light. The moment she stepped inside, Tini Adebayo's voice cut through the air. You're late again. Zawadi bowed her head slightly. I came as soon as I could. Tini approached slowly, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. You always have an excuse. It's getting boring. I'm sorry, ma'am. Tini stopped in front of her, her eyes scanning Zawadi from head to toe with thinly veiled disdain. Look at you. You can barely stand, yet you expect me to believe you can work properly. I can work, Zawadi said quietly. Tini tilted her head, unimpressed. We'll see. She turned and gestured toward the staircase. The guest wing needs to be cleaned tonight. Every room. We have visitors coming tomorrow. Zawadi's heart sank. The guest wing alone was larger than the entire building she cleaned during the day. Yes, ma'am. And don't make a mess of it, Tini added coldly. I won't tolerate incompetence. Zawadi nodded and moved without another word. The guest wing was silent, its vast corridors echoing faintly with each step she took. The rooms were immaculate, yet still required polishing, dusting surfaces that already shone, adjusting items that were already perfectly placed. As she worked, her vision blurred again, the edges darkening slightly. She paused, gripping the edge of a table for support. Just a little more, she told herself. Just finish this room. But her body no longer listened. She pushed forward anyway, wiping down surfaces, making beds, scrubbing bathrooms, until her hands turned red from the harsh chemicals. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. At some point she realized she hadn't eaten all day, not even a sip of water since afternoon. Her stomach twisted painfully, but she ignored it, because hunger was familiar. Weakness, however, was dangerous. Hours later, as she moved into the final room, her hands began to shake uncontrollably. The cloth slipped from her fingers, falling to the floor. Zawadi stared at it for a moment, her mind struggling to catch up with her body. Then slowly she bent down to pick it up. But as she straightened, the room spun violently. She reached out, grabbing onto the edge of the bed, her breathing quick and shallow. No, not now. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing the dizziness to pass. But it didn't. Instead, it grew stronger. Her knees buckled slightly and she stumbled backward, catching herself just in time. Outside the room, footsteps echoed faintly, someone walking through the hallway. Zawadi tried to steady herself, forcing her body upright. She couldn't be seen like this. Not here, not now. She took a step forward, then another, each one heavier than the last. As she reached the doorway, her vision blurred completely for a split second, and she had to grab onto the wall to keep from falling. Her breathing grew louder, uneven. The footsteps outside stopped. For a brief moment, silence filled the space between them. Then a voice, calm, unfamiliar, spoke. "Are you all right?" Zawadi froze. Slowly she lifted her head. Standing at the end of the corridor was a man she had never seen up close before. Tall, composed, dressed in a way that spoke of power without needing to announce it. Kwame Adebayo. She lowered her gaze immediately. "Yes, sir, I'm fine." But her voice betrayed her weak, unsteady. Kwame didn't move closer, but his eyes lingered on her longer than necessary. "You don't look fine," he said quietly. Zawadi tightened her grip on the wall. "I'm okay, sir. I just need to finish cleaning." A pause. Then unexpectedly he stepped forward. Zawadi's heart skipped, not out of fear, but confusion. People like him didn't notice people like her. They didn't stop. They didn't ask. Yet here he was. "You can barely stand." Kwame said, his tone calm but firm. "I can work," she repeated almost instinctively. Something flickered in his expression, something unreadable. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then from downstairs, Tenny's voice rang out sharply. "Zawadi. Why is this taking so long?" Zawadi flinched. "I'm coming, ma'am," she called back quickly, forcing herself to stand straighter. She avoided Kwame's gaze, stepping past him, despite the dizziness that threatened to pull her down again. "I'm fine, sir," she murmured once more. And without waiting for a response, she walked away. But as she disappeared down the corridor, Kwame remained standing there, his eyes following her retreating figure. Something about her didn't sit right with him. Not the exhaustion, he had seen that before. Not the silence many people endured in silence. It was something deeper, something heavy. And for the first time in a long while, Kwame Adebayo found himself unable to simply walk away. Zawadi is pushed beyond her limits, nearly collapsing again while Kwame begins to truly notice her suffering. The next morning arrived too quickly for Zawadi. It felt as though she had only just closed her eyes when the faint gray light crept through the cracks in the wall. Her body protested the moment she tried to move. Every muscle screamed, her limbs heavy as stone, her head pounding with a dull, persistent ache. For a moment she stayed still, staring into nothing. Then she heard it, a cough, sharp, painful. Her heart tightened instantly. "Mama," she whispered, pushing herself up despite the dizziness that followed. Mama Nima lay curled on the mattress, her thin shoulders trembling as another cough escaped her chest. It was worse than yesterday, much worse. Zawadi rushed to her side. "Easy, easy," she murmured, helping her sit up. Her hands trembled as she reached for the empty medicine bottle. Empty. Her breath caught. "I'll go early today," Zawadi said, quickly forcing urgency into her voice to hide the fear rising inside her. "I'll get the medicine. I promise." Mama Nima looked at her, her eyes filled with both love and quiet pain. "Zawadi." "You haven't rested." "I'll rest later," Zawadi replied. But they both knew later never came. She grabbed her bag and stepped outside before her mother could say anything else. If she stayed any longer, she might break. The air outside was cold, biting against her skin as she hurried down the familiar path. Her legs still felt weak, but she pushed through it. There was no room for weakness. At the cafe, Sadeh was already waiting. "You're early," she said, raising an eyebrow. I need to leave earlier today, Zawadi replied carefully. My mother? I don't care. Sadeh cut in sharply. If you leave early, you don't get paid. Zawadi's chest tightened. Please. I just need a few hours. No, Sadie said firmly. Work your full shift or don't come back tomorrow. The words hit like a stone. Zawadi stood there for a moment, silent, her mind racing. If she stayed, she would lose time. If she left, she would lose the job. Both choices felt like losing. I'll stay, she said quietly. Said nodded as if nothing had happened. Good. Then start working. Zawadi turned toward the sink, her heart heavy. Each minute now felt like something she couldn't afford to waste, but she had no choice. The morning dragged painfully. Every second she spent scrubbing dishes, she imagined her mother alone struggling to breathe. The thought gnawed at her, making it harder to focus, harder to move. At one point she paused, gripping the edge of the sink as a wave of dizziness washed over her. Don't slow down, Said called from behind. I'm working, Zawadi replied, her voice barely steady. By the time her shift ended, her hands were shaking uncontrollably. She took the small amount of money offered and rushed out without another word. Her next stop was the pharmacy. The small shop stood on a busy street corner, its shelves lined with medicines she couldn't afford. The pharmacist, an older man named Baba Kofi, recognized her immediately. You're back, he said gently. Zawadi nodded, placing her money on the counter. I need the same medicine. Baba Kofi glanced at the amount, then back at her. His expression softened. This isn't enough, child. I know, Zawadi said quickly. Just give me what it can buy. He hesitated. Your mother needs the full dosage. Anything less, it's all I have, she whispered. For a moment the shop fell silent. Then Baba Kofi sighed and turned to the shelves, carefully measuring out a smaller portion. This will only last 2 days, he said as he handed it to her. Thank you, Zawadi replied, her voice filled with quiet gratitude. As she stepped out of the shop, relief mixed with dread. 2 days. Just 2 days. What would happen after that? She didn't let herself think about it. Instead, she ran. When she reached home, she found Mama Nima exactly where she had left her, but weaker. I brought it, Zawadi said softly, helping her sit up. She carefully measured the dose and held the cup to her mother's lips. Mama Nima drank slowly, her eyes never leaving her daughter's face. You're doing too much, she whispered. Zawadi shook her head. Not enough. A faint smile touched Mama Nima's lips, though sadness lingered beneath it. You were always stubborn. Zawadi smiled back, but her eyes burned. I'll be back tonight, she said, standing up again. Already, Mama Nima asked weakly. I have to go to the estate, Zawadi replied. Mama Nima reached for her hand again, holding it tightly despite her weakness. Zawadi, if anything happens, nothing will happen. Zawadi interrupted quickly. You're going to get better. Mama Nima didn't argue. She simply nodded. And that silence said everything. The estate felt colder that evening. Zawadi arrived earlier than usual, determined not to give Tini another reason to scold her. But even as she moved through the halls, cleaning and organizing, her body felt heavier than ever. The medicine had helped her mother for now, but it hadn't eased the weight on Zawadi's shoulders. Every step reminded her of what she still couldn't afford. As she polished the long dining table, her reflection stared back at her. From the glossy surface, pale, tired, barely recognizable. She looked away. Still alive, I see. Zawadi stiffened. Tinny stood at the doorway, arms crossed, watching her with a faint smirk. Yes, ma'am, Zawadi replied quietly. Tinny walked in slowly, her heels echoing against the floor. You look worse than yesterday. Are you trying to make me look bad in front of our guests? No, ma'am. Then fix yourself, Tinny snapped, and make sure everything is perfect tonight. My brother is hosting an important dinner. Zawadi nodded. Yes, ma'am. Tinny paused, then added, and don't embarrass us. With that, she turned and walked away. Zawadi exhaled slowly, her grip tightening on the cloth in her hand. Don't embarrass us. The words echoed in her mind. She wasn't part of them. She never had been. She was just someone who cleaned up after them. As night fell, the house filled with voices, laughter, conversation, the clinking of glasses. Zawadi moved quietly through it, all invisible, unnoticed, until she wasn't. As she carried a tray across the room, her vision blurred again. The edges darkened her steps, faltering slightly. She tightened her grip, forcing herself forward. Not here. Not now. But as she passed by the guests, her foot caught slightly on the edge of the rug. The tray tilted, a glass slipped. It shattered against the floor. The room fell silent. Zawadi froze. Her heart pounded in her chest as all eyes turned toward her. Tenny's voice cut through the silence. "What did you just do?" Zawadi's throat tightened. "I'm sorry, ma'am." "Sorry?" Tenny repeated, her tone rising. In front of our guests, Zawadi lowered her gaze, her hands trembling. "I'll clean it." "You should have been careful." Tenny snapped, stepping closer. "Or is that too much to ask?" Before Zawadi could respond, another voice spoke. "Enough." The room shifted. Zawadi looked up slowly. Kwame Adebayo stood across the room, his gaze fixed not on the broken glass, but on her. Zawadi's exhaustion causes a public mistake, and Kwame finally steps in, shifting the power dynamic. The silence that followed Kwame's voice was not the kind that came from fear, it came from shock. No one expected him to speak. Not here. Not for someone like her. Zawadi stood frozen. Her breath caught somewhere between her chest and her throat. The broken glass lay scattered at her feet, the faint reflection of the chandelier, flickering in the shards like tiny fragments of a life she could never reach. Tenny turned slowly, disbelief flashing across her face. "Kwame," she said, forcing a tight smile, "it's just a minor issue." The maid was careless. Zawadi's fingers curled inward. Careless. The word stung more than the exhaustion. But Kwame didn't look at Tenny. He was still looking at Zawadi. There was no anger in his eyes, no irritation, just a quiet, unsettling focus, as if he were seeing something no one else in that room cared to notice. "She looks like she's about to collapse," he said calmly. A faint murmur passed through the guests. Tenny's smile faltered for a split second before she straightened. "She's fine. She just needs to learn discipline." Zawadi lowered her gaze again, her voice barely audible. "I'm okay, sir." But even as the words left her lips, her knees weakened slightly. Kwame noticed. He stepped forward. It wasn't a dramatic movement, but in that room it felt like a shift in gravity. Conversations had stopped. Even the soft music in the background seemed distant. "Are you sure?" he asked, his tone quieter now. Zawadi nodded quickly, though her vision blurred again. "Yes, sir." "Then why are you shaking?" he asked. The question landed gently, but it exposed everything she had tried to hide. Zawadi swallowed hard. I can clean this up." She bent down, reaching for the shards of glass, but her hand trembled so badly that she had to pause. A drop of something warm slid down her temple sweat, or tears, she couldn't tell. Before she could touch the broken pieces, a voice snapped sharply. "Leave it!" Zawadi flinched. Tenny stepped forward, her expression tight with controlled anger. "Stand up! You're embarrassing this family." Zawadi froze, then slowly straightened her head, bowed. "I'm sorry, ma'am." "You've said that enough," Tenny replied coldly. "If you cannot handle simple tasks, then perhaps you don't belong here." The words hung heavy in the air. Zawadi's chest tightened. Not here, not now. She couldn't lose this job, not when her mother needed her most. "I can work," she said quickly, her voice trembling but urgent. "Please, I won't make another mistake." Tenny opened her mouth to respond, but Kwame spoke again. "That's enough." This time, there was no softness in his tone. It was firm, decisive. The room fell silent again. Tenny turned to him, her brows knitting slightly. "Kwame, this is not—" "I said it's enough." He repeated, his gaze finally shifting to her. For a moment the siblings stared at each other, an unspoken tension passing between them. Then Kwame stepped past her and walked directly toward Zawadi. Zawadi instinctively took a step back. She wasn't used to being approached like this, especially not by someone like him. "Sit down," he said quietly. Her eyes widened. "Sir, you're not well," he continued. "You need to sit." "I can't," she replied quickly. "I still have work to. That can wait." Zawadi hesitated. Her instinct was to refuse, to keep moving, to keep working, because stopping meant risk. But her body betrayed her. The moment she tried to take another step, her legs faltered. Kwame moved forward, instinctively catching her arm before she could fall. The contact was brief, but it was enough. The room seemed to hold its breath. Zawadi stiffened, her entire body tense with a mix of shock and discomfort. No one had ever caught her like that before. No one had ever stepped in before she hit the ground. "I'm fine," she said again, though her voice barely held together. Kwame didn't let go immediately. "Fine doesn't look like this," he replied. For a moment their eyes met, and something shifted. Zawadi quickly looked away. "I just need a minute," she whispered. Kwame studied her for a second longer, then gently released her arm. "Bring a chair," he said, to one of the staff members nearby. The man hesitated, glancing at Tenny for approval. Tenny's jaw tightened, but under the weight of Kwame's presence, she said nothing. A chair was brought. Zawadi stood there uncertain. "Sit," Kwame repeated. Slowly she obeyed. The moment she lowered herself onto the chair, a wave of exhaustion crashed over her completely. It was as if her body had been waiting for the permission to stop, and now that it had it, everything gave way at once. Her hands rested on her lap, trembling uncontrollably. She tried to hide it. She always tried. But this time, she couldn't. Kwame noticed. "How long have you been working today?" he asked. Zawadi hesitated. "Since morning." "That's not an answer," he said. She swallowed. "I had 2 jobs before coming here. And you ate." A pause. "Yes." Another lie. Kwame didn't respond immediately. He didn't need to. The truth was already written across her face. Behind them, Tinny let out a quiet, frustrated breath. "Kwame, this is unnecessary. She's just trying to gain sympathy." Zawadi's head snapped up slightly, panic flickering in her eyes. "No, ma'am," she said quickly. "I'm not." Kwame raised a hand, slightly stopping her. "She's not performing," he said calmly, his voice cutting through the tension. Tinny's expression hardened. "You're taking this too seriously, and you're not taking it seriously enough," Kwame replied. The room shifted again. Guests exchanged glances, the atmosphere now thick with something unspoken. Zawadi sat there caught in the middle of something she didn't understand and didn't want to be part of. All she wanted was to work, to earn, to survive. "I can continue," she said softly, trying to stand. But the moment she pushed herself up, her vision darkened again. This time she couldn't stop it. The room spun violently. Her breath caught and everything went black. She collapsed, right there, in front of everyone. A collective gasp filled the room. The tray of silence shattered. Zawadi's body hit the polished floor unmoving. For a split second, no one reacted. Then Kwame moved. Fast. He knelt beside her immediately, his hand reaching for her wrist, checking her pulse. "She's burning up," he said sharply. Tenny stood frozen. The guests whispered, but Kwame didn't look at any of them. "Call a doctor, now." His voice was no longer calm. It was urgent, commanding. And for the first time that night, everyone listened. Zawadi collapses completely in front of everyone, forcing Kwame to take full control of the situation. The moment Zawadi's body hit the floor, the illusion of elegance inside the Adebayo estate shattered. The music stopped. The laughter died. All that remained was the sound of hurried footsteps and rising panic. Kwame was already on his knees beside her, his hand steady against her wrist, his eyes focused and sharp. "Water," he said firmly, "and clear this space." For once, no one hesitated. A staff member rushed forward with a glass. Another quickly moved the broken shards away. The guests stepped back, their polished shoes retreating from the scene as if distance could separate them from what they were witnessing. Zawadi lay still, too still. Her breathing was shallow, uneven, her chest rising just enough to remind them she was still there. Kwame gently turned her head to the side, making sure her airway was clear. His fingers brushed against her cheek. Briefly, her skin was hot. Too hot. "How long has she been like this?" he asked without looking up. No one answered. Tenny crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. "She's always been dramatic," she said, though her voice lacked its usual sharpness. Kwame's jaw tightened. "Dramatic," he repeated, finally looking at her. Tenny shifted slightly under his gaze. "People like her exaggerate. It's how they survive." Kwame stood slowly. The room felt smaller as he rose, his presence filling the silence. "And people like you ignore suffering," he replied calmly. The words landed harder than a shout. Tenny opened her mouth to respond, but stopped. Because for the first time there was no room for her authority in that moment. Kwame turned back to Zawadi. "Bring my car around," he instructed a nearby staff member. "We're taking her to the hospital." "Sir?" The man hesitated. "Should we wait for?" "No," Kwame said sharply. "Now?" The urgency in his voice left no space for argument. Within seconds, movement filled the house again, but this time it wasn't the rehearsed rhythm of service. It was real, chaotic, unfiltered. Kwame bent down once more and carefully lifted Zawadi into his arms. She felt lighter than she should have, too light, as if life itself had been slowly drained from her. A faint crease formed between his brows. Kwame Tenny said, her voice quieter now. "You don't have to do this yourself." He didn't respond. Instead, he adjusted his hold on Zawadi, making sure her head rested securely against his shoulder. Then he walked straight through the grand hallway, past the guests, past the staff, out of the house. No one spoke, no one stopped him, because in that moment something had shifted, and everyone could feel it. Outside, the cool night air hit them instantly. The car was already waiting. Kwame moved quickly, opening the back door himself and gently placing Zawadi inside. He climbed in after her, supporting her head as the driver sped off. "Which hospital, sir?" the driver asked. "St. Mary's," Kwame replied without hesitation. It was one of the best private hospitals in the city, and one of the most expensive. The car cut through the night street's headlights, slicing through the darkness. Inside, the silence was heavy, only broken by the faint sound of Zawadi's uneven breathing. Kwame glanced down at her. Even unconscious, her face carried the weight of exhaustion. Her brows were slightly furrowed, as if her body still refused to rest completely. He noticed the details now, the roughness of her hands, the faint marks on her skin, evidence of long hours, hard labor, the thinness of her frame. How had no one seen this, or had they simply chosen not to? His jaw tightened slightly. "Faster," he said. The driver pressed harder on the accelerator. When they arrived, the hospital staff moved quickly, recognizing the urgency, and the man who had brought her in. A stretcher was rolled out. "Sir, please step back," one of the nurses said gently. Kwame did, but his eyes never left Zawadi as they transferred her. "What happened?" the nurse asked. "She collapsed," he replied. "High fever, severe exhaustion." The nurse nodded already, signaling to the others. "We'll take care of her." They rushed her inside. The doors closed behind them. And just like that, she was gone from his sight. Kwame stood there for a moment, unmoving. Then he followed. Inside the hospital, everything moved with practiced efficiency. Nurses passed by doctors, gave instructions. Machines beeped softly in the background. Zawadi was taken into an emergency room. Kwame remained outside, waiting. Minutes passed, then more. Time stretched. A doctor finally emerged, removing his gloves as he approached. "Are you her relative?" he asked. Kwame paused, then quietly, "No." The doctor nodded slightly. "She's severely dehydrated, malnourished, and physically exhausted. Her body has been pushed far beyond its limits." Kwame's expression didn't change, but something tightened beneath the surface. "Will she be okay?" he asked. "With proper care, yes," the doctor replied. "But she needs rest and consistent treatment." This didn't happen overnight. Kwame glanced toward the door behind the doctor. He already knew that. What about the cost? The doctor added carefully. Kwame didn't hesitate. I'll cover everything. The doctor studied him for a moment, then nodded. Very well. We'll proceed with full treatment. As the doctor walked away, Kwame remained where he was. His hands slipped into his pockets, his gaze distant. He should have left. There was no obligation tying him to this situation, no reason to stay. Yet he didn't move, because something about her refused to let him walk away. Hours later, Zawadi was moved to a quiet room. An IV line was attached to her arm, slowly restoring what her body had lost. Her breathing had steadied, though she remained unconscious. Kwame stood by the doorway watching. For the first time since that night began, the chaos had settled, but the weight remained. He stepped closer, stopping beside her bed. Up close, she looked even younger, more fragile. And yet, there was something else. Strength, not the kind that shouted or demanded attention, but the kind that endured. The kind that kept going even when it shouldn't have to. Kwame exhaled slowly. Why, he murmured, though he didn't expect an answer. Why push yourself this far? Why carry so much alone? Zawadi didn't respond. She couldn't. But even in her silence, the answer seemed clear, because she had no other choice. Kwame glanced at the small bag placed beside her bed, the one she had carried with her. It looked worn, overused. He hesitated for a moment, then reached for it. Not out of curiosity, but concern. Inside there was almost nothing. A small cloth, a few coins, and a tiny medicine bottle nearly empty. Kwame stared at it for a moment. Then something clicked. This wasn't just exhaustion. This wasn't just overwork. There was more. Much more. He closed the bag slowly, placing it back exactly where it had been. His expression had changed. The calm was still there. But beneath it, something deeper had taken root. Determination. Because now he understood one thing clearly. Zawadi wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for someone else. Zawadi is rushed to the hospital, and Kwame discovers the depth of her suffering, realizing there is a deeper story behind her collapse. The night stretched into early morning, but Kwame Adebayo did not leave. He remained seated just outside Zawadi's hospital room, his posture straight, his expression composed, but his mind far from still. Around him, the hospital moved through its quiet rhythm, nurses changing shifts, distant footsteps echoing along polished corridors, machines humming softly behind closed doors. Yet none of it settled his thoughts. He had seen exhaustion before, in boardrooms, in factories, in the eyes of people chasing survival in a city that rarely slowed down. But what he had seen in Zawadi was different. It wasn't just fatigue. It was desperation, the kind that hollowed a person from the inside out. Kwame leaned back slightly, his gaze drifting toward the window at the far end of the hallway. The sky was beginning to lighten, a pale gray stretching across the horizon. He had not slept, but sleep was the last thing on his mind. A soft knock broke the silence. He turned. A nurse stepped out of Zawadi's room, adjusting her gloves. "Sir," she said politely, "she's stable now. Her fever has gone down." Kwame stood immediately. "Can I see her?" The nurse hesitated for a brief moment, then nodded. "Yes, but only for a short time. She needs rest." He stepped inside. The room was dim lit only by a soft overhead light. Zawadi lay still on the bed, the IV drip slowly feeding into her arm. Her face, though calmer, still carried traces of exhaustion that no medicine could erase overnight. Kwame approached quietly. Up close, the details were impossible to ignore. The slight hollowness of her cheeks, the faint lines of strain around her eyes, the way her fingers curled slightly as if still holding onto something invisible. He stood there for a moment, simply observing. Then slowly her eyelids fluttered. A small movement, but enough. Zawadi's eyes opened slow, unfocused at first. She blinked. The ceiling above her was unfamiliar. The air smelled different, clean, sterile, not home. Her brows furrowed slightly. Where? Her gaze shifted and landed on him. For a brief second, confusion filled her eyes. Then recognition followed. Zawadi's breath caught. She tried to sit up immediately, but the moment she moved, a wave of weakness forced her back down. Easy, Kwame said calmly, stepping forward. Don't push yourself. Zawadi stared at him, her heart racing. Sir, she whispered, her voice dry, fragile. What am I doing here? She asked, her eyes darting around the room as panic began to rise. You collapsed, Kwame replied. You're in the hospital. Her expression changed instantly. Fear, sharp, immediate. No, she murmured, trying to sit up again. I can't be here. Her hand reached for the IV instinctively. Kwame reacted quickly, gently stopping her. You need treatment, he said. I can't afford this, she replied, her voice trembling now. I have to leave. Her breathing grew faster. I need to go back to work. If I don't show up, Zawadi. Her name stopped her. She froze. For a moment, the room went silent again. You're not going anywhere. Kwame continued, his tone steady but firm. Not until you're stable. Zawadi shook her head weakly. You don't understand. Then help me understand. The words were simple, but they carried something she wasn't used to. An invitation, not a command. Zawadi hesitated. Her eyes lowered. I have responsibility, she said quietly. Kwame didn't respond immediately. He simply waited. And somehow, that made it harder to stay silent. My mother, she finally whispered. She's sick. The words came out slowly, as if each one carried weight. She needs medicine, treatment. I have to work, or she won't. Her voice broke slightly, but she pushed through it. She won't make it. The room fell still. Kwame watched her carefully. How long, he asked. Zawadi hesitated again. Months. And you've been working like this the whole time? She nodded faintly. 3 jobs, she added, almost as if it didn't matter. Kwame exhaled slowly. That explained everything. The exhaustion, the hunger, the collapse. But knowing didn't make it easier to accept. Why didn't you ask for help? He asked. Zawadi let out a small bitter breath. From who, she replied. The question hung in the air, unanswered. Because the truth was obvious. There had been no one. Kwame looked away briefly, his jaw tightening slightly, then back at her. Where is she now? He asked. At home, Zawadi said quickly, panic creeping back into her voice. Alone. The word hit harder than she intended. Kwame nodded once. I'll send someone to check on her. Zawadi's eyes widened. No, it's already being handled, he said calmly. She stared at him. Not in disbelief, but in confusion. Why would he do that? You don't have to, she began. I know, he interrupted gently. Another silence. This one different, softer. Zawadi looked down at her hands, her fingers tightening slightly against the hospital sheets. I don't want charity, she said quietly. The words were firm, clear. Kwame studied her for a moment, then nodded. This isn't charity, he said. Zawadi looked up. Then what is it, she asked. He didn't answer immediately, because the truth wasn't simple, not even to him. But he knew one thing. It's help, he said finally. Zawadi held his gaze for a second longer, then looked away again. Help. The word felt unfamiliar, dangerous, because help often came with conditions, with expectations, with something taken in return. I'll pay you back, she said quickly. Whatever this costs, I'll work. You don't owe me anything, Kwame replied. But I do, she insisted. No, he said quietly, you don't. The firmness in his voice left no room for argument. Zawadi fell silent. Her chest rose and fell slowly, her body still weak, her mind still racing. Everything felt uncertain, unfamiliar, but beneath it all, for the first time in a long time, she wasn't alone. A soft knock interrupted them. The nurse stepped back in. "Sir," she said gently, "she needs to rest." Kwame nodded. He turned back to Zawadi. "You'll stay here," he said. "Focus on getting better." Zawadi hesitated. Then slowly, she nodded. Because for once she didn't have the strength to fight everything. Kwame stepped toward the door. But before he left, he paused. "Zawadi," he said. She looked up. "Your mother will be taken care of." He didn't wait for a response. He simply walked out, leaving her alone in the quiet room. Zawadi stared at the door long after it closed, her thoughts tangled, her emotions uncertain, but deep inside, something had shifted. Not completely, not yet, but enough to be felt. Zawadi reveals the truth about her sick mother while Kwame steps beyond observation and begins to take action. Morning arrives slowly, but for Zawadi, time no longer moved the way it used to. Inside the hospital room, everything felt suspended, quiet, controlled, almost unreal. The steady drip of the IV, the soft hum of machines, the faint footsteps outside the door. It was a world completely different from the one she had been living in, and yet her mind refused to rest. The moment she woke again, her first thought was not about herself. It was about her mother. Zawadi pushed herself up slightly, wincing as a wave of weakness spread through her body. The room tilted faintly, but she held on, gripping the edge of the bed. "I have to go," she whispered to herself. Her eyes scanned the room quickly, searching for something, anything, that could help her leave. Her bag. It sat neatly on the small table beside her bed. She reached for it, her fingers trembling as she pulled it closer. Inside, everything was exactly as she remembered, except for one thing: the small bottle of medicine. It was still there, but now placed beside it was something new, a folded paper. Zawadi frowned slightly and picked it up. Her hands hesitated before opening it. Inside, written in clear, simple handwriting, were a few words: "Your mother is safe. She has been admitted to the hospital. Focus on healing." Zawadi froze. Her breath caught. Her eyes moved over the words again, and again: safe, hospital, admitted. The meaning settled slowly. Then all at once, her heart began to race. "No," she whispered, shaking her head slightly. It didn't make sense. How? When she had left her mother at home just yesterday, weak, alone. There had been no money, no help, no way. Her chest tightened as she swung her legs over the side of the bed, ignoring the protest from her body. She needed answers. Now. The moment her feet touched the floor, dizziness hit her hard. She grabbed onto the bed for support, her breathing quickening. "Miss, you shouldn't be out of bed." Zawadi looked up. A nurse stood at the doorway, her expression calm but firm. "My mother," Zawadi said quickly. "Where is she?" The nurse stepped closer. "She's in this hospital." Zawadi's eyes widened. "Here." "Yes." The room seemed to shrink around her. "She was brought in early this morning," the nurse continued. "Severe respiratory complications. But she's stable now." Zawadi stared at her, trying to process the words. Stable. Alive. Her legs weakened again, but this time it wasn't from exhaustion. It was relief. "Can I see her?" she asked, her voice barely holding together. The nurse hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Only briefly," she said. "You're still recovering." Zawadi didn't wait. She moved carefully, one step at a time, leaning slightly on the wall as the nurse guided her down the corridor. Each step felt heavier than the last, but her heart pulled her forward. Room after room passed in a blur, until finally they stopped. The nurse pushed the door open gently. Zawadi stepped inside, and there she was. Mama Nima lay on the hospital bed, an oxygen tube resting lightly beneath her nose, her breathing slow but steady. Alive. Zawadi's breath broke. "Mama," she whispered. She moved closer, her steps unsteady but urgent. Mama Nima stirred slightly at the sound of her voice. Her eyes opened slowly. For a brief moment, confusion flickered, then recognition. "Zawadi," she murmured, her voice soft but clearer than before. Tears filled Zawadi's eyes instantly. "I'm here," she said, reaching for her hand. "I'm here." Mama Nima smiled faintly, her fingers tightening weakly around Zawadi's. "They brought me here," she said. "I don't know how." Zawadi shook her head, her voice trembling. "I don't know either." But deep down she did. Kwame. There was no one else. Silence settled between them, but it wasn't heavy this time. It was soft, relieved. "You should be resting," Mama Nima said gently, noticing the IV mark still on Zawadi's arm. "I will," Zawadi replied. "After this." Mama Nima studied her face carefully. "You look tired." Zawadi let out a small breathless laugh. "I've been worse." Mama Nima smiled faintly. Then her expression softened. "You've been carrying too much," she said quietly. Zawadi shook her head. "Not anymore." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Not anymore. She wasn't sure if she believed them yet, but she wanted to. After a few minutes, the nurse gently reminded her it was time to return to her room. Zawadi squeezed her mother's hand one last time before stepping back. "I'll come again," she said. Mama Nima nodded. As Zawadi turned to leave, she paused at the doorway. For the first time in weeks, her chest didn't feel as tight. The fear wasn't gone, but it had loosened its grip. Back in her room, Zawadi sat quietly on the bed, her thoughts racing in a different way now. Relief, confusion, gratitude, and something else, unease. Because nothing came without a reason, nothing came without a cost. And yet, Kwame had done all of this without asking for anything in return. Why the question lingered. She stared at the folded paper in her hands again, then at the door, as if expecting him to walk in. He didn't. Not immediately. Hours passed. The hospital returned to its quiet rhythm. Zawadi lay back against the pillow, her body finally beginning to accept rest, but her mind refused to settle completely, until a soft knock. Her eyes opened. "Come in," she said. The door opened slowly. Kwame stepped inside. He looked the same as before, calm, composed, distant, in a way that made him hard to read, but his eyes went straight to her. "You're awake," he said. Zawadi nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." A pause. Then she held up the paper. "You did this," she said. It wasn't a question. Kwame didn't deny it. "Yes." Zawadi swallowed. "I don't understand," she said quietly. Kwame stepped further into the room. "You needed help," he replied simply. "That doesn't explain why you helped me," she said. Another pause, this time longer, because the answer wasn't simple, even for him. "I couldn't ignore it," he said finally. Zawadi looked at him carefully. People ignored things like her every day. That was the world she knew. And now she asked. Kwame met her gaze. "Now you focus on getting better," he said. And after that, the question hung between them, unanswered. For now. Zawadi discovers her mother has been saved and realizes Kwame has changed her reality completely, raising deeper emotional tension and unanswered questions. After Kwame left the room, the silence returned, but it was no longer the same kind of silence Zawadi had known all her life. Before, silence had meant emptiness. Now it was filled with questions. Zawadi lay back against the pillow, staring at the ceiling. Her body felt lighter, the IV slowly restoring what exhaustion had taken from her. But her mind refused to rest. Everything had changed too quickly. Yesterday, she had been counting coins under a dim light, wondering how many more days her mother had left. Today, her mother was in a hospital bed receiving treatment she could never have afforded. And she herself, she was here, safe, fed, taken care of. It didn't feel real. Her fingers tightened slightly around the thin hospital sheet. Nothing in her life had ever come without a cost. So where was it? That thought lingered quietly, unsettling her. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she said. The door opened, and a nurse stepped in with a tray. "It's time to eat," the nurse said gently. Zawadi glanced at the tray, warm food, fresh fruit, a glass of juice. Her stomach twisted instinctively, not from hunger, but from unfamiliarity. She hadn't eaten a proper meal like this in she couldn't even remember. "I'm not hungry," she said softly. The nurse smiled kindly. "You need to eat if you want to recover." Zawadi hesitated, then nodded. Slowly she picked up the spoon. The first bite felt strange. Her body didn't know how to react, but as she took another and another, something shifted. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, her breathing steadied. For the first time in days, her body began to accept care. Across the hallway in a private consultation room, Kwame stood with the doctor reviewing reports. "She'll recover physically," the doctor said, flipping through the files. "But long-term stress like this doesn't disappear overnight." Kwame nodded slightly. "And her mother?" he asked. "Responding well to treatment," the doctor replied. "But she needs continued care, medication, monitoring." Kwame didn't hesitate. "Make sure she gets everything she needs." The doctor looked at him carefully. "This is a long-term commitment," he said. "I'm aware." The firmness in Kwame's voice made it clear this was not a temporary decision. The doctor nodded. "Very well." As the meeting ended, Kwame stepped back into the hallway. He paused for a moment outside Zawadi's room, then walked away. Not because he didn't care, but because he knew something important. She needed space. Back in her room, Zawadi finished her meal slowly. Her hands no longer trembled as much. Her body felt different, stronger. But her thoughts remained restless. By afternoon, she couldn't stay still anymore. She stood carefully testing her balance. Better, not perfect, but better. She walked to the window. Outside, the city moved as it always did. Cars passing, people rushing, life continuing without pause. Somewhere out there was the estate, her job, her responsibility, her survival. She turned away from the window. "I need to go back," she whispered to herself, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. Later that evening, she found a nurse at the station. "I want to be discharged," Zawadi said. The nurse looked at her surprised. "You're not ready yet." "I feel better," Zawadi insisted. "That's not the same as being recovered," the nurse replied gently. Zawadi hesitated. "I can't stay here," she said quietly. The nurse studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll inform the doctor." Within an hour, the doctor arrived. "You're improving," he said, "but I would strongly recommend staying another day or two." "I can't," Zawadi replied. "Because of work?" She nodded. The doctor sighed slightly. "You'll undo all the progress you've made if you push yourself again." Zawadi lowered her gaze. "I don't have a choice." The words were simple, but heavy. The doctor didn't argue further. Instead, he wrote something down. "If you insist, I'll discharge you tomorrow morning, but you must come back for follow-ups." Zawadi nodded quickly. "I will." That night she visited her mother again. Mama Nima looked stronger. Not fully recovered, but better. "You should stay," her mother said softly. Zawadi shook her head. "I can't lose my job." Mama Nima studied her carefully. "Is it worth losing yourself?" she asked. Zawadi didn't answer, because she didn't know. The next morning, Zawadi was discharged. Her steps were slow but steady as she walked out of the hospital. The air outside felt different, sharper, real. She adjusted the strap of her bag and began walking. Back to the life she knew, back to the estate, back to survival. When she arrived, the gates opened as usual. But something felt different. The guards looked at her differently, not with familiarity, but with hesitation. Zawadi frowned slightly but said nothing. She stepped inside. The house was quieter than usual. No laughter, no noise, just silence. She walked in cautiously. "Zawadi." The voice came from behind her. She turned. Tenny Adebayo stood at the staircase, her expression unreadable. "You're back," Tenny said. Zawadi nodded. "Yes, ma'am." A pause. Then Tenny stepped down slowly. "We didn't expect you to return," she said. Zawadi's chest tightened slightly. "I came to work." Tenny stopped in front of her. "For now," she said calmly, "you're not working here anymore." The words hit instantly. Zawadi blinked. What, you've been dismissed?" Tenny continued, effective immediately. Zawadi's heart dropped. No, please, she said quickly. I can work. I won't make mistakes again. Tenny tilted her head slightly. This isn't about mistakes, she said. Then what is it? Zawadi asked, her voice breaking slightly. Another pause. Then Tenny spoke. You've become inconvenient. The word echoed in Zawadi's ears. Inconvenient. Her hands tightened at her sides. I need this job, she said, but Tenny shook her head. That's not my concern. Zawadi stood there frozen. Everything she had fought for, gone, just like that. Behind Tenny, footsteps echoed. Slow, steady. Zawadi didn't need to turn. She already knew. Kwame. The tension in the air shifted instantly. Tenny straightened slightly. Kwame walked down the stairs, his gaze calm but focused. What's going on? He asked. Tenny glanced at him briefly. I've dismissed her, she said. Silence. Then Kwame's eyes moved to Zawadi, and something in his expression changed. Zawadi loses her job just as she returns, forcing a confrontation between her fragile independence and Kwame's growing involvement. The silence that followed Tenny's words felt heavier than anything Zawadi had carried before. I've dismissed her. It echoed in her mind, repeating itself in a slow, crushing rhythm. Kwame stood at the bottom of the staircase, his gaze fixed not on Tenny, but on Zawadi. There was something different in his expression now, not just concern, not just curiosity, something deeper. What do you mean you've dismissed her? He asked calmly. Tenny crossed her arms, her posture defensive but controlled. Exactly what I said. She's no longer needed here. Zawadi's throat tightened. Please, I need this job. Her voice was quiet, but it trembled. Kwame heard it, and this time he didn't stay silent. On what grounds, he asked. Tenny turned slightly toward him. She's unreliable. She collapsed in the middle of work. We can't have that in this house, especially with important guests coming and going. Kwame's expression didn't change, but his voice hardened slightly. She collapsed because she was overworked. Tenny let out a small, incredulous laugh. Or because she couldn't handle the job. Zawadi flinched. Kwame didn't. You had her working beyond reasonable limits, he said. Anyone would have collapsed. Tenny's eyes narrowed. Since when do you concern yourself with staff matters? Since it became a matter of basic human decency, Kwame replied. The words landed sharply. The tension between them was no longer subtle. Zawadi stood frozen between them, her heart pounding. This wasn't a situation she belonged in. This wasn't a conversation she was supposed to be part of. But it was about her survival, her future. I'm sorry, she said quickly, stepping forward slightly. I didn't mean to cause trouble. I need the job. I'll work harder. Tenny looked at her, unimpressed. That's the problem. You've already shown you can't keep up. Zawadi insisted, though, her voice wavered. Enough, Tenny said firmly. The decision is made. A pause, then no. The word came from Kwame, quiet, but absolute. Tenny turned sharply. Excuse me, she's not dismissed, Kwame said. Zawadi's breath caught. Tenny's expression hardened. You don't get to override me in my own household. Kwame took a step forward. This isn't just your household, he said calmly, and this isn't just your decision. The room seemed to shrink around them. Zawadi's hands trembled slightly at her sides. She didn't understand the power dynamics at play, but she could feel the shift. This is unnecessary, Tenny said, her voice tightening. You're turning a simple staffing issue into something it's not. Kwame didn't look away. You dismissed her because she became inconvenient, he said, not because she failed. Tenny didn't respond immediately, because it was true, and they both knew it. Zawadi stood there, her chest rising and falling unevenly. She had spent her entire life trying to remain invisible, to survive quietly. Now she was the center of something she couldn't control. I don't want to cause conflict, she said softly. Both of them looked at her. I just need to work, she added. Kwame's gaze softened slightly. Tenny's didn't. You won't work here, Tenny said firmly. That's final. Silence. Then Kwame spoke again. Then she'll work for me. The words landed like a quiet explosion. Zawadi blinked. At what she whispered, Tinny let out a sharp breath. Kwame, don't be ridiculous. I'm not, he replied. This is impulsive, Tinny continued. You don't even know her. Kwame's eyes flicked briefly toward Zawadi. I know enough. Another silence. He stepped closer to Zawadi. Do you want to work? He asked. Zawadi hesitated. This wasn't what she expected. This wasn't what she planned. I need to work, she said carefully. Kwame nodded once. Then you'll work under me, he said, with proper conditions, proper pay. Zawadi's mind struggled to catch up. Proper pay, proper conditions. The words felt distant, unreal. I don't understand, she said. You don't have to, Kwame replied. Not yet. Tinny stepped forward, her patience thinning. You're making a mistake. Kwame didn't look at her. Maybe he said calmly, but it's mine to make. The tension between them reached its peak. For a moment it felt like something might break. Then Tinny exhaled sharply and stepped back. Do whatever you want, she said, but don't expect me to support it. Kwame didn't respond, because he didn't need her support. Zawadi stood there caught between disbelief and uncertainty. This wasn't how things worked, not in her world. People didn't just step in like this. People didn't change your life overnight. There must be something you want in return, she said quietly. Kwame turned to her. No. Zawadi shook her head slightly. Nothing comes for free. Kwame studied her for a moment, then said, This isn't free. You'll work. You'll earn it. The answer was simple. Grounded. It didn't feel like charity. It felt like something else. Something she could understand. Zawadi looked down briefly, her thoughts racing. If she refused, she had nothing. If she accepted, everything changed. And that terrified her. I don't want pity, she said. Kwame's voice softened slightly. Then don't take it as pity. Another pause. Then slowly Zawadi nodded. Okay, she said. The word felt heavier than anything she had said before, because it meant stepping into something unknown. Kwame nodded once. Good. He turned toward the door. Come with me, he said. Zawadi hesitated for just a second, then followed. As she walked out of the Adebayo estate, she didn't look back, because there was nothing left for her there, only what she had lost. Ahead of her was something she didn't understand yet, but something had already begun to change. Behind them, Tinny stood in silence, watching, her expression unreadable, because deep down she knew this wasn't over, not even close. Kwame publicly overrides Tinny, offers Zawadi a new path, forcing her to choose between fear and change. The drive away from the Adebayo estate felt unreal to Zawadi. She sat quietly in the back seat of Kwame's car, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the passing streets. The city moved as it always did, people walking, vendors, calling out taxis, weaving through traffic. But everything felt distant, like she was watching life from behind a glass wall. Just hours ago, she had been standing at the gates begging not to lose her job. Now, she was leaving with the very man who had ended that life for her and offered something new, something she didn't yet understand. Kwame sat in the front, his posture calm, his attention divided between the road and his thoughts. He hadn't said much since they left the estate, and Zawadi hadn't asked, because she didn't know what to ask. After a while, the car slowed and turned into a quiet street lined with modern buildings. It wasn't the crowded township she was used to. It wasn't the grand estate either. It was somewhere in between, safe, orderly, different. The car came to a stop in front of a modest but well-kept apartment complex. Kwame stepped out first. Zawadi hesitated for a moment, then followed. Where are we? She asked softly. Kwame walked toward the entrance. A place for you to stay. Zawadi froze. I can't. You can, he interrupted calmly. I didn't agree to this, she said quickly. Kwame turned to face her. You agreed to work, he said. This is part of it. Zawadi shook her head. I don't need a place like this. I have a home. Kwame's gaze softened slightly, but he didn't step back. Your home doesn't have running water half the time, he said, and it's not a place you can recover. Zawadi's chest tightened. It's still my home, she replied. I'm not taking that away from you, Kwame said. I'm giving you time. The words made her pause. Time to rest, time to think, time she had never had. She looked away, her thoughts tangled. This isn't permanent, he added. Just until you're stable, until your mother is fully treated. Zawadi hesitated, then asked quietly. And after that, Kwame didn't answer immediately, because the truth wasn't fully clear yet. After that, he said finally, you decide what you want. The answer surprised her. People didn't usually give her choices. They gave her orders, conditions, limits, but not choices. She looked at him carefully, trying to understand him, and failing. Why are you doing this? She asked again. Kwame exhaled slowly. I already told you, he said. I couldn't ignore it. Zawadi shook her head slightly. That's not enough. Kwame met her gaze. No, he admitted quietly, it's not. A silence settled between them. Then he stepped aside slightly, gesturing toward the building. You can stand here and question everything, he said calmly, or you can go inside and rest. Zawadi hesitated. Then slowly she walked forward, because no matter how uncertain she felt, her body needed rest. Inside the apartment was simple but clean. A small living space, a kitchen, a bedroom, everything in place, everything functioning. Zawadi stood near the doorway, unsure if she should step further. This is yours for now, Kwame said. She looked around. It felt too much. I'll pay for it, she said quickly. Kwame shook his head. Focus on getting better first. I mean it, she insisted. I'll work. I'll earn it. Kwame nodded once. Then we'll discuss that when you're ready. Zawadi didn't argue further, because part of her needed to hold on to that idea that she would earn everything given to her, that she wouldn't owe anyone. Later that evening, after Kwame had left, Zawadi sat alone in the quiet apartment. No noise, no pressure, no commands, just silence. But this silence felt different from before. It wasn't empty. It was unfamiliar. She stood and walked slowly to the bathroom. She turned on the tap. Water flowed instantly, clean, clear. She stared at it for a long moment, then reached out, letting it run over her fingers. A simple thing, but it felt like something she had been denied for too long. Her chest tightened slightly, not from pain, from something else, emotion. That night she slept, not perfectly, not without waking, but deeper than she had in months. And for the first time, her body began to recover. The next morning, a soft knock woke her. Zawadi sat up slowly, her mind taking a moment to adjust. Who is it? She asked. It's me, a familiar voice replied. Kwame. She stood and opened the door. He stepped in carrying a small bag. I brought you something, he said. Zawadi frowned slightly. You didn't have to. It's not a gift, he said. It's information. That caught her attention. He placed the bag on the table and opened it. Inside were documents, medical reports, receipts. Zawadi stepped closer. These are your mother's treatment details, Kwame explained. Medication schedules, follow-up appointments. Zawadi's eyes moved quickly over the pages. Everything was there. Everything she had been struggling to piece together alone. How did you... I asked the doctors to prepare it, he said. Zawadi nodded slowly. This helps, she admitted. Kwame watched her for a moment, then added, There's something else. Zawadi looked up. You're not working as a maid anymore, he said. She blinked. What? Kwame leaned slightly against the table. You'll still work, he clarified, but not like before. Zawadi's brows furrowed. Then what will I do? Kwame studied her carefully. You'll start at my company, he said. Entry level, office support. Zawadi stared at him. I don't have experience, she said immediately. You have discipline, he replied. You have resilience. That's enough to start. Zawadi shook her head slightly. This is too much. No, Kwame said calmly. This is a chance. The word hung in the air. A chance. Something she had never truly had before. Zawadi looked down at the papers in her hands, then back at him. Her heart pounded. Fear, uncertainty, hope, all at once. "I don't know if I can do this," she said honestly. Kwame nodded. "You don't have to know yet," he said. "You just have to try." Silence. Then slowly Zawadi took a breath and nodded. "Okay." The word felt different this time, stronger, because this wasn't just survival anymore. This was something new, something unknown. And for the first time, Zawadi wasn't just reacting to life. She was stepping into it. Zawadi is offered a completely new life path, forcing her to confront fear, identity, and the possibility of change. Zawadi's first morning at Kwame's company began with a kind of silence she had never known before, structured, orderly, and quietly intimidating. The building rose high above the street, its glass exterior reflecting the early sunlight. People moved in and out with purpose, dressed in clean-pressed clothes, their footsteps confident, their conversations low and focused. Zawadi stood just outside the entrance for a moment, her hands clasped tightly together. She had never imagined herself in a place like this, not even in her quietest dreams. "Breathe." The voice came from beside her. She turned. Kwame stood there, composed as always, his presence grounding in a way she didn't expect. "I'm trying," she admitted. Kwame nodded slightly. "That's enough for today." He stepped forward, and after a brief hesitation, Zawadi followed. Inside, everything felt even more overwhelming. The floors gleamed. The air smelled clean. The people, different. Zawadi became aware of herself immediately, her simple outfit, her careful steps, the way her eyes moved too quickly, taking in everything. She felt out of place, and she knew it. Kwame noticed, but he didn't say it. Instead, he walked beside her, not ahead, not behind, beside. They reached the reception desk. "Good morning, sir." The receptionist greeted Kwame with a polite smile. Then her eyes shifted to Zawadi, curious but professional. "And this is Zawadi Ndlovu," Kwame said calmly. "She's starting today." There was no explanation, no justification, just a statement. Zawadi felt something shift inside her. Not confidence, not yet, but something close. The receptionist nodded. "Welcome." Zawadi gave a small, hesitant nod in return. Kwame led her through the building, explaining as they walked. "You'll start in administrative support," he said. "Basic tasks. Filing, organizing, assisting where needed." Zawadi listened carefully, trying to hold on to every word. "I've assigned someone to guide you," he added. They stopped in front of a glass office. Inside stood a woman in her early 30s, her posture straight, her expression sharp but not unkind. "This is Amina Bello," Kwame said. "She'll be your supervisor." Amina stepped forward. Her eyes moved over Zawadi briefly, not judging, not dismissive, but assessing. "Good morning," she said. Zawadi straightened slightly. "Good morning." Amina nodded once. "We'll see how you do." It wasn't warm, but it wasn't hostile either, and that was enough. Kwame glanced at Zawadi one last time. "You'll be fine," he said quietly. Zawadi nodded. "I'll try." Kwame left, and just like that, she was on her own. The first hour was overwhelming. Papers, systems, instructions. Zawadi struggled to keep up. Her hands moved carefully, her eyes focused, but everything felt faster than she was used to. At one point, she placed a file in the wrong folder. A small mistake, but enough. "That's not where it goes." Amina said, her tone firm but controlled. Zawadi immediately corrected it. "I'm sorry." Amina watched her for a moment. "You don't need to apologize for learning," she said. "Just pay attention." Zawadi nodded quickly. "I will." And she did. She watched, listened, adjusted. Every task became something she approached with full focus, as if failure would send her back to where she came from. Because in her mind, it could. By midday, exhaustion crept in. Not the physical kind she was used to, but mental. The kind that came from constant awareness, from trying not to make mistakes, from trying to belong. Amina noticed. "You can take a break," she said. Zawadi shook her head. "I'm fine." Amina studied her, then said, "This isn't like your old work. You don't need to prove your worth every second." The words hit deeper than expected. Zawadi lowered her gaze slightly. "I'm used to it," she admitted. Amina nodded slowly. "I can see that." She gestured toward the break area. "Go. 10 minutes." Zawadi hesitated, then obeyed. In the break room, she sat quietly, her hands resting on her knees. Around her, others talked, casually, laughed lightly, moved freely. She stayed silent, observing, learning, because this world was different, and she needed to understand it. When she returned, she worked more steadily, not perfectly, but better. And Amina noticed. By the end of the day, something had changed. Zawadi wasn't just reacting anymore. She was adapting, slowly, carefully, but undeniably. As she prepared to leave, Amina approached her. "You learn fast," she said. Zawadi looked up surprised. "Thank you." Amina paused, then added, "But don't burn yourself out trying to prove it." Zawadi nodded. "I'll try." Outside the building, the sun was beginning to set. Zawadi stepped out, her body tired, but not broken. Her mind full, but not overwhelmed. It was different. Everything was different. As she walked down the steps, she saw him, Kwame, waiting. She stopped. "You stayed?" she asked. Kwame shrugged slightly. "I wanted to see how your first day went." Zawadi hesitated, then said honestly it was hard. Kwame nodded. "I expected that, but," she added slowly, "I didn't fail." A faint hint of something approval crossed Kwame's expression. "No," he said. "You didn't?" A small silence passed between them. Then Zawadi looked at him carefully. "I still don't understand why you're doing all this," she said. Kwame met her gaze. "Do you need to understand it right now?" he asked. Zawadi paused, then shook her head. "No." Kwame nodded. "Then focus on what's in front of you." Zawadi looked away briefly, then back. "I will." And for the first time she meant it without fear, because something inside her had begun to shift. Not completely, but enough. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was growing. And though the path ahead was still uncertain, she was no longer walking it alone. Zawadi steps into a new world and proves she can adapt, marking the beginning of her transformation and independence. The days that followed did not transform Zawadi overnight. There was no sudden ease, no instant confidence, no miracle that erased the years she had spent fighting just to survive. Instead, her progress came quietly through repetition, correction, and a steady determination that refused to break. Each morning she woke earlier than necessary, not because she had to, but because she needed time to prepare, to steady her thoughts, to remind herself that she belonged where she was going. The apartment no longer felt unfamiliar. It felt temporary, and that mattered, because Zawadi never allowed herself to forget where she came from. After checking on her mother at the hospital, always first, always without fail, she would head to the office. Mama Nima was improving steadily now, her strength returning little by little, her voice clearer each day. "You look different," Mama Nima said one morning, studying her daughter carefully. Zawadi paused. "Different how?" "Lighter," her mother replied. "Not because your problems are gone, but because you're no longer carrying them alone." Zawadi didn't respond immediately, because that was exactly what frightened her. Relying on someone else, trusting something outside of her own strength. It was unfamiliar territory, and unfamiliar meant risk. At the office, things were changing too. Zawadi moved more confidently now, her steps less hesitant, her hands steadier. She still made mistakes, but fewer, and when she did, she corrected them quickly. Amina noticed. "You're adapting faster than most," she said one afternoon, watching Zawadi organize a stack of documents with careful precision. Zawadi glanced up briefly. "I have to." Amina tilted her head slightly. No, you choose to. The distinction lingered in Zawadi's mind long after the conversation ended, because it was true. She was no longer forced into every moment. Somewhere along the way, she had started choosing. But not everything around her had shifted so easily. Whispers began, quiet at first, then more noticeable. Did you hear how she got here? She was a maid, right? Why would Mr. Adebayo bring someone like her? And Zawadi heard them? Of course she did. She had spent her whole life hearing things people thought she wouldn't notice. But this time it felt different, because now she stood among them, not below, not invisible, and that made her a target. One afternoon, as she passed by a group near the break room, the voices didn't lower in time. Some people don't earn their place, one woman said softly. They're just lucky. Zawadi slowed, just slightly, but she didn't stop, because she understood something important. Responding would only pull her backward. So she kept walking, head forward, step steady, even as the words lingered behind her. Later that evening, she stayed behind to finish organizing a set of reports. The office was quieter now, most employees having already left. Only a few lights remained on. Zawadi moved through the files, carefully double-checking each detail, not because anyone was watching, but because she was. You're still here, the voice came from behind her. Zawadi turned. Kwame stood at the doorway. She straightened slightly. I wanted to finish this. Kwame stepped inside, his gaze moving briefly over the organized desk. You don't have to stay late to prove anything, he said. Zawadi hesitated. I'm not trying to prove anything, she replied. Kwame raised an eyebrow slightly. Then why are you here? Zawadi looked down at the papers, then answered honestly. Because I don't want to lose this. The words were simple, but they carried everything. Kwame studied her for a moment. You won't lose it because you're not perfect, he said. You'll lose it if you stop growing. Zawadi absorbed that quietly. Growth, not perfection. It was a different way of thinking, one she wasn't used to. I hear what people say, she admitted after a pause. Kwame didn't ask what she meant. He already knew, and he said. Zawadi's fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the desk. They think I don't belong here. Kwame stepped closer. Do you think that he asked? Zawadi hesitated because the answer wasn't simple. I don't know yet, she said. Kwame nodded. That's honest, he said. A silence settled between them. Then he added, but you're here, and you're working. That matters more than what anyone thinks. Zawadi looked at him. Something in his words grounded her. Not comfort, not reassurance, but something stronger. Clarity. I don't want this to be given to me, she said. It isn't, Kwame replied. You're earning it every day you show up. Another pause. Then Zawadi asked the question that had been growing inside her for days. Why did you choose me? Kwame didn't answer immediately, because the truth had evolved. At first it had been instinct, then responsibility. But now it was something more. I didn't choose you because you needed help, he said finally. Zawadi listened closely. I chose you because you didn't give up even when no one was watching. The words settled deeply, because they saw her, not her situation, not her struggle, her. Zawadi looked away briefly, her chest tightening. No one had ever said something like that to her before. Not in that way, not with that kind of meaning. I'm still learning, she said quietly. Kwame nodded. Good. A faint silence followed. Then you should go home, he added. Zawadi glanced at the clock. It was later than she thought. She nodded. As she gathered her things, she paused, then turned back to him. I'll keep trying, she said. Kwame met her gaze. I know. And for the first time, Zawadi believed that he did. She left the office that night with something new inside her. Not confidence, not yet, but something close. Belief. Not in the world, not in others, but in herself. And though the path ahead was still uncertain, she was no longer afraid of it. Because she wasn't just surviving anymore, she was becoming. Zawadi confronts judgment and doubt externally and internally and begins to believe in her own worth, deepening her emotional connection with Kwame. The city did not change for Zawadi. The traffic still roared each morning. The air still carried the same mix of dust and urgency. People still hurried past one another, chasing lives that rarely slowed down long enough to notice who was falling behind. But Zawadi had changed. Not completely, not in ways that could be seen at first glance, but inside something had shifted. She moved differently now, not with confidence, not yet, but with intention. Her steps were steadier, her thoughts clearer, her silence no longer filled with fear, but with quiet awareness. Still, growth did not come without resistance, and resistance did not always come from others. Sometimes it came from within. That morning, Zawadi stood outside the hospital room, her hand resting lightly against the door. Inside, Mama Nima sat up in bed speaking softly with a nurse. Her voice was stronger now, her breathing more stable. She was recovering, and that should have brought peace, but instead Zawadi felt something unexpected. Distance, not physical, but emotional. For so long her life had been defined by one purpose, saving her mother. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every drop of strength she had given, it had all been for that. And now that purpose was no longer consuming her entirely. The space it left behind felt unfamiliar, uncertain. Zawadi stepped inside. "Mama," she said gently. Mama Nima turned her face, lighting up slightly. "Zawadi." Zawadi smiled and moved closer, adjusting the blanket around her mother's shoulders. "You look stronger today." "I feel stronger," Mama Nima replied. A pause. Then she studied her daughter carefully. "But you," she added, "you look troubled." Zawadi hesitated, then sat down beside her. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do now," she admitted quietly. Mama Nima tilted her head slightly. "What do you mean for so long?" "Everything was about you," Zawadi said. "About keeping you alive. About surviving." Her voice softened. "Now I don't know who I am without that." The words hung in the air, honest, unfiltered. Mama Nima reached for her hand. "You are more than your struggles, Zawadi," she said gently. "You always have been." Zawadi looked down. "I don't feel like it." "That's because you've never had the chance to feel anything else," her mother replied. Silence settled between them. Then Mama Nima added, "You're afraid." Zawadi didn't deny it. "Yes." Of what Mama Nima asked. Zawadi hesitated, then answered, "Of losing myself in something I don't understand." She didn't need to say his name. They both knew. Kwame, the man who had changed everything, the man she didn't fully trust, not because he had done anything wrong, but because what he offered felt too much. Mama Nima watched her quietly. "Do you trust him?" she asked. Zawadi didn't answer immediately, because the truth wasn't simple. "I don't know," she said. Mama Nima nodded slowly. "That's okay," she said. "Trust doesn't come from what someone gives you. It comes from what they show you. Over time." Zawadi absorbed that, slowly, carefully. Later that day at the office, Zawadi felt the weight of everything she had just admitted. Her movements were slower, her focus divided. Amina noticed immediately. "You're distracted," she said. Zawadi didn't deny it. "I'm thinking." Amina leaned slightly against the desk. "About him?" she asked. Zawadi looked up surprised. Amina gave a small knowing smile. "You're not the first person to look confused around Mr. Adebayo," she said. Zawadi frowned slightly. "Is he always like this? Like what? Doing things that don't make sense?" Amina let out a quiet breath. "He doesn't act without reason," she said, "even if you don't see it yet." Zawadi looked away. "That's what worries me." Amina studied her for a moment, then said, "You're not used to being seen." The words hit directly. Zawadi didn't respond, because they were true. Her entire life had been built on being invisible, and now someone saw her. Not just her work, not just her struggle, her, and that felt dangerous, because being seen meant being vulnerable. That evening, as the office emptied, Zawadi stayed behind again, not to prove anything, but because she needed time to think. The quiet helped. It always had. She stood by the window looking out at the city below. Lights flickered on one by one, life continuing, unaware, unchanged. Behind her, the door opened. She didn't turn. "You've been staying late a lot, Kwame." She recognized his voice instantly. Zawadi kept her gaze on the window. "I needed time." "For work?" he asked. "For thinking," she replied. Kwame stepped closer. "And what did you figure out?" Zawadi exhaled slowly. "That I don't understand what you want from me." The honesty was immediate, unfiltered. Kwame didn't seem surprised. "I told you," he said. "I don't want anything." Zawadi turned. "That's not true." Their eyes met. "You don't invest this much in someone without expecting something," she said. Kwame studied her carefully. "Then what do you think I expect?" he asked. Zawadi hesitated, because she didn't know. "That's the problem," she admitted. Silence. Then Kwame spoke. "I expect you to choose." Zawadi frowned slightly. "Choose what? Who you want to become," he said. The answer caught her off guard. "That's not something you give someone," she said. "No," Kwame replied, "but it's something you can protect or take away." Zawadi's chest tightened slightly. "Are you protecting it?" she asked. Kwame didn't answer immediately, because the truth was complicated. "I'm giving you space to find it," he said finally. The words settled deeply, because they weren't controlling, they weren't demanding, they were freeing, and that scared her even more. "Why me?" she asked again. Kwame looked at her, really looked. "Because you kept going, when you had every reason to stop," he said. Zawadi held his gaze. "And now a pause. Then now I want to see what you do when you're not just surviving." The answer lingered, heavy, meaningful, and for the first time Zawadi didn't feel trapped by it. She felt challenged, not by him, but by herself. A long silence followed. Then she nodded, slowly. "I don't know what that looks like yet," she said. Kwame nodded. "You're not supposed to." Another pause, then Zawadi spoke again. "But I'll figure it out." Kwame's expression softened slightly. "I know you will." And in that moment something shifted between them, not into love, not yet, but into something deeper, understanding, respect, possibility. Zawadi confronts her fear of losing herself and challenges Kwame's intentions, leading to a powerful emotional exchange about identity, trust, and choice. The morning Zawadi brought her mother home from the hospital, the sky was clear in a way she hadn't noticed in years. Not because the sky had changed, but because she finally had the space to look up. Mama Nima walked slowly beside her, supported by a cane and Zawadi's steady arm. Each step was careful, measured, but strong. Stronger than before. Stronger than Zawadi had dared to hope. The small township road stretched ahead, familiar yet different. Children played in the dust. Neighbors glanced over, some surprised, some curious, some quietly respectful. They had seen Zawadi struggle. They had seen her carry more than most could bear, and now they were seeing something new. Not wealth, not status, but dignity. Zawadi unlocked the door to their home, pushing it open slowly. The room inside was exactly as they had left it. Simple, worn, real. Mama Nima stepped inside and paused, looking around. "It still feels like home," she said softly. Zawadi nodded. "It is." But even as she said it, she knew something had shifted. Home was no longer just this room. Home was wherever she could stand without fear. They settled in quietly. Zawadi arranged the bed, prepared water, checked her mother's medication schedule. Everything she had learned now guiding her actions with precision. There was no panic, no desperation, only calm. That alone felt like a miracle. Later that afternoon, a car stopped outside. Zawadi didn't need to look to know who it was. Kwame stepped out, his presence as composed as ever. But today Zawadi didn't feel small standing in front of him. She felt equal, Not in status, but in self. You made it back, he said. Zawadi nodded. She's home. Kwame glanced briefly inside, then back at her. How is she recovering? Zawadi replied. A small silence followed. Then Zawadi spoke. I need to talk to you. Kwame nodded. I figured you would. They stepped a short distance away from the house, the quiet hum of the neighborhood surrounding them. Zawadi took a breath. Everything she had been holding in, everything she had been trying to understand, it all came to this moment. I'm grateful, she said. Kwame didn't interrupt. For everything you did, she continued. For my mother? For me? Her voice was steady, but firm. But I need to know something, she added. Kwame met her gaze. Ask. Zawadi held his eyes. If I walk away from all of this, your company, the apartment, everything, will you let me? The question hung in the air, heavy, direct, honest. Kwame didn't answer immediately, because it mattered, not just to her, but to him. Finally, he said yes. No hesitation, no condition, just one word. Zawadi's chest tightened slightly, even after everything she asked. Kwame nodded. Everything I did was to give you a choice, he said, not to take one away. Silence. Then Zawadi looked down briefly, before lifting her gaze again. I'm not walking away, she said. Kwame didn't react, but something in his posture shifted. I just needed to know I could, she added. Kwame nodded once. That matters. Zawadi exhaled slowly, then continued, I don't want to depend on you, she said. Not in a way that makes me lose myself. You won't, Kwame replied. How do you know, she asked. Because you've been fighting too long to become someone else, he said. The words landed deeply. Zawadi held his gaze. And what about you? She asked. Kwame raised an eyebrow slightly. What about me? Why are you still here? She asked. It was a different question now, not about help, not about obligation, but about something deeper. Kwame didn't look away. Because I want to be, he said. Zawadi searched his expression for doubt, for hidden motives, for anything that didn't feel real. She found none, only certainty, and that unsettled her in a different way. Wanting something isn't always enough, she said quietly. No, Kwame agreed, but it's where it starts. Another silence. Then I don't love you, Zawadi said. The words were clear, unapologetic, honest. Kwame didn't flinch. I didn't ask you to, he replied. Zawadi's eyes softened slightly. I don't even know who I am yet, she continued, not fully. Kwame nodded. Then don't rush it. Zawadi hesitated, then asked, and if I never feel that way, Kwame met her gaze, then you won't. The answer was simple, unforced, free. Zawadi exhaled slowly. Something inside her loosened, because this wasn't pressure, this wasn't control, this was space. And for the first time, she didn't feel like she had to run from it. I want to keep working, she said. You will, Kwame replied. I want to earn everything I have, she added. You already are. Zawadi shook her head slightly. Not yet. Kwame didn't argue, because he understood. This wasn't about facts, it was about identity. I'll get there, she said. Kwame nodded. I know. A faint silence settled between them. Then Zawadi spoke again, but I don't want you to disappear either. The words came out quieter, less certain, but real. Kwame's expression shifted slightly, not into surprise, but into something warmer. I won't, he said. Zawadi nodded, and for the first time she allowed herself to smile. Not because everything was perfect, not because the future was clear, but because, for once, she wasn't afraid of it. Weeks passed. Zawadi continued working at the company, growing stronger with each day. Her confidence built slowly, naturally grounded in effort, not circumstance. Mama Nima regained her health fully, her laughter returning to the small home that had once held only silence. And Kwame, he remained, not as a savior, not as a solution, but as a presence, steady, respectful, real. Their connection didn't rush, it didn't demand, it grew through conversations, through understanding, through time, until one evening. As they stood together overlooking the city, Zawadi turned to him. "I'm ready," she said. Kwame looked at her for what he asked. Zawadi smiled softly. "To choose." A pause. "Then I choose you?" Not because she needed him, not because he saved her, but because she wanted him. And that made all the difference. Zawadi chooses love on her own terms, free, independent, and fully aware of her worth. Life does not always change in one moment. Sometimes it changes in quiet steps. The kind no one sees, the kind that happen when a person refuses to give up, even when everything tells them to. Zawadi's story is not just about being rescued. It is about refusing to break, about holding on to dignity when the world tries to strip it away, about learning that help does not mean weakness and that accepting it does not make you less. And most importantly, it is about choice, because true change begins the moment you are given the freedom to choose and the courage to do so. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect. What would you choose if fear was no longer in your way? Share your thoughts in the comments. Where are you watching from? And what time is it in your country right now? Don't forget to share this story with someone who needs hope, and subscribe for more powerful stories that remind us of the strength we carry within. Because sometimes all it takes is one moment, one choice to change everything.